In session 6, we're going to deal with God's wisdom. Wisdom means that God never makes a mistake. That's a hard concept. I mean, do you think he made a mistake in your life? What about the story of Jeremy Camp and how after 4 months of marriage, his wife died? A mistake? According to Scripture, the answer is no. It's a part of a bigger plan. Now, granted, it's tough for us to embrace that plan. It just doesn't make sense to us here right now because we're so caught up in the right now. But I think you'll see tonight as we look at God's wisdom that this is bigger than us.
I had to come to a place in my life at the deepest, darkest moment of my life. I had to come to a place where I had to realize that my whole world had fallen apart. But everything I knew about God was still true. And here's what we want to do this evening. And for 8 weeks during this snow camp, Rick and I have been dealing with this topic of where was God when. And I want to tell you this, there is no such thing. I can't just take you to a verse, I could give you the verse, all things work together for good to them that love God and, called according to his purpose. Is that a true verse? Yes. But it might not make you feel any better because right now you're going, wait a minute, this just doesn't make sense. I could say to you, God is good. And you go, well, yeah, but right now I don't feel like he's very good. What we're going to talk about tonight is the whole idea of God's wisdom. And you go, I don't think God made a very good choice here. And so what we have to do is we have to come to a place where we make a choice. We have to come to a place where we have to decide, wait a minute, it is not about my feelings. It is not about what is going on. It is not about this thing or that thing. Here's what it is all about. It is all about coming back to the one thing that doesn't change, okay? Life changes, our feelings change, situations change. Here's the only thing that doesn't change. You ready for this? It's God. And so the only thing we can come back to is God. And so what we're doing in these weeks is we're covering 8 of the attributes, and you say, what in the world is an attribute? Characteristics of God. And we're just talking about some of them. Because here's the bottom line. We have to say, I could hold this Bible up and say, this Bible is true, but I can't make you believe that. I can say to you, God is a good God. I can't make you believe that. The bottom line is this. You have to come to a point where you either say, I believe that, or no, I don't. And our point tonight and in all these weeks has not been to try to convince you to believe anything. Our point in all of these weeks has been this thing right here. You ready? Is to help you to look at the one thing that can give you the anchor for your soul that won't change. Because otherwise, if you just keep looking at, well, I'll go to church more, I'll get more Christian friends, I'll read the Bible more, I'll pray more, and whatever, guess what? More may not work. And so we have to focus on the one aspect that doesn't change, and that's God. So I want to talk about the whole idea that God is wise. He's, some of his attributes we talked about that he's sovereign. We talk about that he's a God of love. We talk about other things like that. But here tonight is God is wisdom. In other words, here's the little tagline, if you would. God cannot learn. God cannot learn. If he can learn, he's not God. Now, let me look at it this way. You've got a situation in your life, you've got some crisis in your life, some tragedy. Maybe you had a friend that something happened in their life, and you go, why did this happen? Maybe you say something like this. If God cannot learn and his ways are always perfect, then, let me ask some questions. You say, okay, if God cannot learn and his ways are always perfect, then why does he seem to be making all these mistakes? Now, most of us wouldn't want to say that out loud. I mean, this blogger didn't have a problem doing that. But most of you wouldn't want to say that. I mean, wait a minute, it looks like God made a mistake. We don't want to say that out loud. We may feel it in our heart. What we want to do in these sessions is we want to let you know something. That's probably where many of you are living. If God cannot learn and all of his ways are perfect, then why do I question that he really has all that knowledge? If God is perfect and his ways are perfect, then why did he allow this tragic situation in my life? I mean, after all, if he really is God and he really is wise and he really knows everything and he never can learn anything, then why did he let this thing happen to me? If God is really wise and his ways are perfect, then why does the world seem to be so out of control? You go, whoa, those are some of the things I've been thinking about. Well, there's some of the things that all of us think about. We just don't want to admit it. If God's ways are perfect and he cannot learn, then why does he let people do bad things? Why does he let a father go in and kill all of his children and then shoot himself? Why does he let all this happen? It just doesn't, we say, wait a minute. If God his ways are perfect and he cannot learn, then why doesn't he fix everything and everybody? Why doesn't he just come along and maybe just sprinkle some kind of special something on them and make everybody good? Well, those are questions that we want to try to direct some answers to this evening if we could. Right now, we got a testimony, and I want you to watch here on the screens as the testimony and just see what is being said here.
They're calling it the storm of the century. But they said that about Katrina too. Living in Florida all my life, you'd think I'd know more about hurricanes.
Up to 200 to 220 miles per hour as the hurricane makes landfall.
Everything's gonna be okay.
Whereas it hasn't yet they've mandatory evacuation. We highly recommend.
All I know is that before the power went out, it was the biggest, meanest looking storm I'd ever seen on the news. We can't leave. Poverty and arrogance are a deadly combination in a mandatory evacuation. Too poor for the gas, too proud to ask for help.
No.
We have to leave.
We don't have.
Yes, we
There's
do.
no reason.
Why can't
There's
you
no
ever ask
reason.
for help?
Me? I take care of this family. What are you talking about? I don't need it.
I don't know what's gonna happen, but it certainly looks like my chances of dying are pretty high. We live in a mobile home, and they were predicting 200-mile-per-hour winds an hour ago before the power went out. Winds like that could... Why would God allow this? How can he expect me to trust him when it seems like my world is falling apart? When God created this world, how could he have not known that this planet would generate storms like this? Was this storm just an accident, or did he just forget about me? I wish I knew what was going to happen when the hurricane comes. Sometimes I don't just want to trust God. I just want to know and have this fear of not knowing gone.
Many of us have felt that way. I just don't know. It doesn't make sense. I don't know what's going to be next. What's going to happen to me? How in the world, why in the world would God let something like this happen? He had to have known when he created the world that storms like this were going to happen, right? But if God cannot learn anything, and if God's ways are perfect, then yes, he already knew that. But why did all that come together? Let's look here for a moment, if we would. What is the truth about God? What is it? What does it really mean to say that God is wise, that he has all wisdom? Look at this quote with me for just a moment. It means this: it's the ability to devise perfect ends and to achieve those ends by the most perfect means. In other words, he can see the end from the beginning. He doesn't make mistakes. He can see the end from the beginning. He can devise the perfect means and then the perfect way to get to those means. Now, we look at it and we go, wait a minute, you mean like a Hurricane Katrina or one of these things? Those are perfect means? No. We look at that and we go, humanly speaking, that's not perfect. What is it that brings us to that point? Here's what it means for God to be all wise. Number one, his understanding is infinite. In other words, he has no limitations. He has no limits. Here's another one. God is wise in himself. In other words, here's the idea. God does not gain wisdom from others. I talk to the guys on the front row and I gain wisdom from them. Guess what? God doesn't gain wisdom from any of us. Here's the God's way cannot be improved upon. We have a program like this tonight, and at the end of every program, they sit down and they talk about it and they look at it and they go, okay, how can we make it better for next week? Never have to have a planning session like that with God's plan. God's ways cannot be improved upon. God is all wise, and as such, he cannot make a mistake. Now, that's a tough one for me. Maybe it's a tough one for you. Your friend takes his life. Your parents get a divorce. You got abused. You were raped. And we say, wait a minute, God doesn't make a mistake. That's a tough one. But that's what it means to say that God has wisdom, that He is wisdom. God has wisdom by essence, not experience. Now, that's just kind of a fancy way of saying this. I learned wisdom by doing sometimes dumb things. I learned that, you don't grab a stove when it's hot because you'll get burned. You learn other things. That's the way I learned certain things. I learned wisdom by the experience of things. God doesn't need wisdom. What about this? God's wisdom is perpetual. It never fades. You ever been talking to somebody and you're trying to explain a situation that happened to you and you're just, going through it and all of a sudden you can't even remember the person's name you're talking about? Yeah. Or you're trying to talk about some particular, here's where it really hits you. You studied and then you show up for the test. See, but you know what? God's wisdom never fades. It never goes away. God is able to accurately judge all things. He is able to accurately judge all things. And as we think about that, and as we think about God's wisdom, I want to take you for a moment, and if you're taking notes, and some of you are jotting them down, here's some verses. I'm not going to have you turn to all of them. I'm not going to put them all on the screen, but I want to call maybe some highlights to you about those. Here it is. The first one is this. In Proverbs chapter 3 and verse 19, he says this, the wisdom the Lord by wisdom founded the earth. So in wisdom, He founded, He created, He established everything. By His wisdom, He did that. Another passage, and it's a long one, so I'm only going to point out a couple of things. In Proverbs chapter 3, in verses 12 through 31, he says, counsel is mine and sound wisdom. I am understanding. I have strength. He goes on to say, the Lord possessed me at the beginning of His way. Wisdom is talking here, and he says, you know what? God possessed me when He started out, when He was creating the world. Now, God has no beginning and no end, but when He was creating the world, at the very beginning of the creation, He did so in great wisdom because He had wisdom and He is wisdom. See, when we talk about a characteristic or an attribute of God, and we say God is love or God is sovereign or whatever, that does not mean that He just practices that. That means that He is that, and He is wise. Listen to the rest of this when it says, there were no depths and I was brought forth, when there was no fountains abounding with water. Before the mountains were settled, before the hills I was brought forth. While as yet He had not made the earth or the fields or the primal dust or the world. When He had prepared the heavens, I was there. When He drew a circle on the face of the deep. When He established the clouds above. When He strengthened the foundation of the deep. When He assigned to the sea its limits, so that the water would not transgress and command where He commanded. When He marked out the foundations of the earth. Then I was beside Him as a master craftsman, and I was daily His delight, rejoicing always with Him, rejoicing in His inhabited world, and the delight of the Son of Man. Wisdom. Psalm 24 and verse 1, David talks about God creating the earth, again, in His wisdom. Psalm 104 and verse 24 says, O Lord, how manifold are your works. In wisdom you have made them all. Wisdom, God's wisdom. Psalm 147 in verse 5, great is the Lord and mighty in power. His understanding is infinite. Now, the word infinite is not a word we're familiar with a lot today. But infinite, very simply, is this. It means it has no limits. God's wisdom is infinite. Our wisdom is finite. If I learn and learn and learn and learn and learn until I die, guess what? I only have this much wisdom. But God's wisdom is infinite. It has no limits. 1 Timothy chapter 1 and verse 17. Now the King, down unto the King eternal, immortal, invisible, to the only wise God. Romans chapter 11 verses 33 through 36 says, Oh, the depths and the riches of the wisdom and the knowledge of God. How unsearchable are His judgments, and His ways are past finding out. For who has known the mind of the Lord, or who hath become His counselor, or who has first given it to Him, or helped Him, think through things? Nobody. Nobody. Because God is wisdom. All right, so we say God is wisdom. He can't make a mistake. We say that His wisdom never fades. We say that His wisdom is perpetual. We say that He has wisdom by experience, or by essence and not by experience. We say all that, and now we read through all these verses, and we say God is wise. So here's the big question. The big question is, how does that apply to me? Or as we've been putting it here in these weeks, you might just use these two words, so what? See, for some of you who have gone through some really difficult situations, I go through that and I say, here's God, and He's all wise, and He never makes a mistake, and here's what the Bible says. And some of you, if you're honest, at least in your heart, you're going, so what? So what? How does that apply to you? Well, let me just give you a couple of thoughts. Number one, it applies to us in that it gives us security. See, I can trust Him in the fact that He knows what is best. If He has unlimited knowledge, I talk to someone down here, in leadership at the Bible Institute, whatever, and I say, what do you think I ought to do here? And they give me information. They give me the best wisdom they can, but it's limited. But we can have incredible security knowing that we can trust God because His wisdom is unlimited. Socrates, interestingly enough, we think of Socrates, Plato, others as being incredibly wise people, and they were. Socrates said this of himself. He had said about himself that his wisdom could be summed up in the fact that he knew nothing. Even people that are the wisest that we think of in our day and in our generation and in our culture, they would, when all their wisdom is put together, they would have to sum it up the same way Socrates did. My wisdom is as I know nothing. Secondly, it gives us comfort. Comfort. I can find comfort in knowing that His plan is ultimately the best for me. So, when you face those hard things, those difficult things, those things that come in and just completely rock your world, and your whole world has fallen apart, we can find comfort in the fact that He cares, that He loves us, and that His plan is best. Now, I want to say to you, honestly, from my heart, humanly speaking, that does not always make sense. And I want to tell you from my heart, there have been a lot of times where I've said, God, okay, you say your plan is best. I want you to know something. I'm not sure. You go, whoa, and you're up there preaching? Yeah. Because that's where many of us live. And if you deny that, if you deny that in your life, well, I've never had that thought. I just always have trusted God. Then would you please move to Schroon Lake and try to help me become more godly? Because I want to tell you, most every one of us, we've gone through those times where we've said, I don't understand. And it just doesn't seem to fit. But we come to a place where we say, okay, God, you are wise, and because you are wise, you're all wisdom, then here's what I can do. I can find comfort that your ways are perfect. Here's another one. It's a matter of discovery. He has planned the best goal for us and the best path to travel to reach that goal. Here's one of the things that we do. And maybe you've done this. If you're a Christian and you're a believer before tonight, maybe last night you trusted the Lord or this morning you did. But you came here and you already knew the Lord. Maybe you've prayed something like this. I have. God, I want to be a great Christian, and I want to be more like your Son. I want to be more like Jesus. And then when something happens in my life that I don't like, you know what I find myself saying? What in the world are you doing? And not audibly, not out loud, not a spirit, not a shining light, but I have come many times to the point of realizing as I've read my Bible and I've searched the Scriptures, I've found many times the Lord just simply said this, I'm just simply answering your prayer. See, He knows the best goal for us and the best path to get us there. And sometimes it takes us through some potholes, and sometimes it takes us through some valleys, and sometimes it takes us through some depths of the sea. But He knows the best. Now you say, you're saying that because you're a preacher. Well, I am, okay? But I'm also saying that because personally, having come through some scenarios in my life, I've had to come to a point of deciding, you know what? I can either walk by faith or I can become bitter and I can say, God, you blew it. You really don't know what's going on. I had to make a decision just like you do. And when I say God plans the best thing out, you're saying, well, that sounds like one of those cliches. No, that's not a cliche. Trust me. That's where you just got to decide. How does it apply to me? Well, I think it gives us a challenge to accept His will and to stop living by our feelings. As long as we keep living by our feelings, we're going to have issues. Because when your world falls apart, when everything's been rocked, you've got to go by the one thing that you can count on. Remember last night I talked about holding on to the garbage or the debris and to try to stay afloat in the ocean instead of holding on to the one thing that was sure, and that was the lifeline? Well, that's what happens here. We have got to stop living by our feelings. A good friend of mine that's head of a youth organization just recently wrote in a magazine an article, and I want to just read it to you. I want to read a quote. Listen to what he said. Do you remember singing, "Happy, happy, happy, happy are the people whose God is the Lord"? I do. And then you got to understand, he's a little bit straightforward. He said, it messed me up. He said, because I thought difficulty in life was a sign of God's absence. And see, that's what happens sometimes. You just walk forward, you trust the Lord, you commit your life to the Lord. Tomorrow morning when we have the commitment service, you just walk forward, everything's going to be okay. I got news for you. If somebody tells you that, they're lying. It's not going to all be great. It will be the best decision you ever made in your life. It will be the most intelligent decision you ever made in your life, but it won't be the easiest thing that happens. And the life that follows that isn't going to just be all wonderful. You're going to have some difficulty. But let me say this. I know people who haven't made those decisions, and they're having difficulty too, and they have no anchor for their soul. He says I thought it was that. He said, we need to teach our students to meet the unchanging God who is in the midst of their suffering rather than invent a God that makes sense at the moment. And that's what we do. We have a young person that's going through something. I was just talking the other night via Facebook with a young lady whose sister, and some of our students here know, whose sister is dying. And I just very simply said to her, I don't have any really cool answers for you, but I can tell you this, I care. And I can't just say to you, everything's going to be okay. Not when you're sitting there watching your sister die. See, we have got to quit trying to invent a God. We try to invent this God that makes everything seem like it's okay. Instead of saying, wait a minute, we need to meet God right where He is. So, here's the kind of, we bring this all down conclusion. How are we going to process this in our life? When we talk about applying it to our life, that's the so what, okay? So what? Now, if you want to put down 2 words for this one, here it is, now what? All right, Mike, I'm with you. I understand that God is all wise. I understand what the Bible says. I understand that I can get security and comfort and discovery in my life and finding His plan for my life. It's a challenge to me to stop living by my feelings. I understand all that. Now, what do I do? Well, I want to submit to you that there are 3 things you can do. There are 3 things that you can do now that you're doing this. Now what? Here's 3 things you can do. First of all, you can compartmentalize it. And when I talk about compartmentalizing and compartmentalization, here's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that you are going to just kind of suppress the truth. You say, okay, I understand what you're saying tonight, but I'm just going to put that in a box somewhere. Eddie, I want you to help me here just a minute, if you would. I'll be back, okay? I've got something here I want you to help me with. Now, this is just an envelope, okay? If you can see this all over. And it just very simply says, my world, okay? Eddie, this is your world, okay? This is God, okay? Now, what I want you to do, Eddie, is I want you to fold this poster board up with God in it, okay? He won't be mad, okay? And I want you to fold it up, and I want you to get it in an envelope. Okay, I'll hold your envelope. You just get it all folded up.
Like that?
Yeah, I would.